X-Files?
I believe they have to do with unexplained phenomena.
What is up, YouTube? Hope everyone had a good day. Today I have an encounter, one that you guys are really gonna like. And the reason I say that is because the original, and it's an article, or two newspaper articles actually, and the original was written 30 years ago. And I guess when this took place in New Zealand, when their version of the Freedom of Information Act kicked in, new information was released, so the newspaper went and spoke with one of the witnesses again. So without further ado, let's get into it. An hour-long late-night encounter on a South Canterbury back road has convinced the Thew family of Temuka that unidentified flying objects do exist. Mr. and Miss Ken Thew yesterday described how a multicolored flying object paced them along the Waitohi Road in the early hours of the morning of July 12th, approaching to within 120 yards of their car and changing colors as it went. Mr. Thew, a motor mechanic, said they had always had an open mind on UFOs before their encounter, but were now convinced such phenomena existed. Miss Thew said they knew by the hour of the night, the maneuvers, and closeness of the object that it was not an airplane. While Miss Thew was frightened by the encounter and wanted to drive faster, her husband wanted her to pull over to the roadside to get a better view of the object. They were returning to Temuka from Pleasant Point with their 3 daughters. Miss Thew, who was driving, said she thought the lights were a reflection on the wet windows, but after winding down the window, the couple could still clearly see the object. They said it seemed to be approaching the car, then abruptly stopped about 200 to 300 meters away, then changed direction and began to pace the car. The sight itself didn't frighten me, but the car's speed told the story of how my wife felt, Mr. Thew said. When we opened the car window and the object came closer to the car, it was something we had never seen before. There was no noise, and it was quite apparent this was a controllable flying object. Both Miss Thew and her eldest daughter were intrigued by what seemed like the shape of a figure 8, which seemed to be outside the object. In movement, a fan-like tail of golden red color appeared to follow it, but the tail was not visible when it was stationary. The object finally shot away towards the east. It did not seem to move between 2 points, according to Mr. and Miss Thew. Suddenly it was just somewhere else. Mr. Thew said that as soon as he got home, he wrote down all he could recall while the incident was still fresh in his memory. The Thews said that after reaching Temuka, they followed the UFO, which was still changing colors to the east of the town towards the sea. Giving up the chase, they returned home, and the couple said when they looked up, the object was hovering above them at an altitude of about 1,000 feet. Mr. Thew said yesterday that although their sighting had been a fortnight ago, his wife had seen other strange lights in the sky only 3 nights ago. The Thews were unaware until yesterday that the shape and colors of the object they claimed to have seen were almost identical with a detailed UFO sighting in Illinois, America, from 1952. In that sighting, a nurse, Miss Ann Sohn, described a similar shaped craft complete with windows along the side and the same reddish color to the object. And that is from an article from the Tomorrow Herald from New Zealand, 7/31/1981. And then the second part of the article is entitled Flying Object Followed Family, and it's pretty much a follow-up 30 years later on the same report by the same newspaper. Nearly 30 years after a late-night encounter with a UFO, Temuka man Ken Thew remains convinced he saw something extraordinary on Waitohi Road. Yesterday, after authorization from the Defense Force, more than 2,000 pages of secret files held by Archives New Zealand were released. The files are said to include every witness account of unidentified flying objects reported to authorities since the 1950s, and Mr. Thew said he would be interested in reading the files. The now retired mechanic said he did not think about the encounter unless other people brought it up in conversation, but he had spoken to others who had seen UFOs. What they have seen is different compared to what we have seen, but that's apparently the way it is. The memory of the large, bright object which accompanied Mr. Thew, his wife, and their 3 young daughters home from Pleasant Point to Temuka on July 12, 1981 was still vivid, Mr. Thew said. My thoughts are the same. What you see is what you see. It was a bit frightening for a start. We were just traveling home from a night at Mikaber's place, the oldest girl said. What's that over there? And I said, I had no idea. The couple described to the Temuka Herald in 1981 how a multicolored flying object paced them along the road, approaching to within 110 meters of their car and changing colors as it went. They knew by the hour of the night, the maneuvers and closeness of the object, that it was definitely not an airplane. Yesterday, Mr. Thew said the size and the brilliance of the object, which was shaped like a football, told him it was unnatural. However, while the encounter was reported in media, they kept the second part of the story to themselves and close friends. Several visits by a man to their home and workplace shortly after seeing the object. Introducing himself as Mr. Wright, an investigator from Christchurch and dressed in a musty suit, he warned them not to contact or approach the object, Mr. Thew said. The man's behavior was peculiar. He drank a cup of boiling tea in one gulp, read a page by scanning from bottom to top, and knew the name of their pet dog before it was told to him. Before the encounter with the object, Mr. Thew said he had a divided opinion on UFOs. If somebody had told me what I had seen myself, I would sort of look at them and think, well, okay. The object was something he was not familiar with and had never seen the likes of before, he said. He did not rule out a natural explanation, but said the speed at which it traveled and the intensity of its lights were unnatural. The Thews account garnered media attention in 1981, and they were visited unexpectedly by a television crew. They got the kids to draw pictures of what they saw, Mr. Thew said. Most of the responses they got were positive. People called them to ask them about the incident, and later, a Polish professor visited them to learn more about their experience. Their story attracted a small negative response, with about 5 calls from people suggesting they were mad, he said. However, Mr. Thew stands by what he said. I had my faculties. I know what I saw. And that is from the Tomorrow Herald, December 23, 2010. So it was just a follow-up article. They just went and re-interviewed the man that had the experience. And 30 years later, though, he's saying he saw what he saw and what happened happened. So, he's not wavering on his story. As always, I take everything with a grain of salt, but I have no reason to question this man's character at the moment. I have no reason to think he would just tell a story to a newspaper for no reason and then continue on with that hoax 30 years later. That doesn't make much sense to me. As well as his wife and 3 daughters were in the car, so that makes a grand total of 5 witnesses. That's a pretty large encounter, as well as the drawing that the daughters did. All lend credence to the idea that they did indeed see something, they experienced something, and whatever it was spectacular enough that they still haven't forgotten about it. As always, let me know what you all make of this interesting encounter down below. If you have an account or personal encounter of anything odd and unexplained, whether it be ghostly visitors, a sinister stranger, cryptid or unknown entity encounters, demonic or angelic visitation, extraterrestrial contact, or anything else unexplained, feel free to contact me with your account by sending an email to designatedxshow@gmail.com. See you in the next one. Peace.